Welcome to Women Entrepreneurs Radio. I'm your host, Deborah Bailey. And when I started this show in 2008, I was on a mission to promote women-owned businesses and help women succeed by providing resources and valuable tips from other women and men, small business owners. In each interview, my guests speak openly about their triumphs, the scary times, and tough decisions they had to make along the way. Women Entrepreneurs Radio is about showing women how to harness their natural strengths to achieve success on their own terms. Hi everyone, welcome to Women Entrepreneurs Radio with your host Deborah Bailey. I'm so glad you could join me today. And if you're listening to this show on Podomatic, please come to the WomenEntrepreneurSecrets.com site and you will find links for iTunes and also for some other places this show has been posted to. And if you go there and you go to podcast in the menu bar, click there and you'll get to the page that will show you all the different platforms the show is uploaded to. And of course, on the blog, you'll also see the current show posted with the bio and links as well. So there's many different ways for you to find more about the show. And also, if you have iTunes and you'd like to leave a review of this show, that would be great because the more reviews, the more likely the show will be found on iTunes. So please make sure that you take a moment to do that. Or if you want to leave feedback or any suggestions for upcoming shows, you can also do that in WomenEntrepreneurSecrets.com. That's also another place for you to do that. So I hope that you will. So we're going to get started with my show today. I think it's going to be very, very informative. And with empowering insights to help women navigate the narrowest corridors of sexism, tech industry pioneer Magdalena Yesil shares on-the-ground career advice that is as powerful as any MBA. Pioneering Silicon Valley entrepreneur and investor Magdalena Yesil came to the United States in 1976 with 2 suitcases and $43, blind to the challenges she would face as a woman, an immigrant in Silicon Valley. Today, she's best known as the first investor and a founding board member of Salesforce, the now multi-billion-dollar company that ushered in the era of cloud-based computing. In Power Up, How Smart Women Win in the New Economy, Yesil urges women to look beyond the alarming gender statistics of the workplace and feel confident entering tech or any field, but also be prepared to deal with the challenges. She shares what she experienced as a woman in Silicon Valley with surprising candor and heart, relying not just on her insight, but that of more than a dozen top women entrepreneurs to offer pragmatic takeaways on topics such as owning career choices while managing risk, getting credit for your work, managing sexual dynamics, recruiting allies in the movement toward a supportive workplace for everyone. Pragmatic, incisive, and full of highly actionable advice, Yesil prepares ambitious women to break glass ceilings and rise to the top in the new Silicon Valley and beyond. So welcome, Magdalena. I'm really glad to have you on the show.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, and we were chatting a little bit before we started about how this really is a very hot topic with women and in tech, and a lot of things being written about it and shared. And I'm really glad to speak to someone who has been on the inside and can give a different viewpoint of your experiences. So your book, Power Up, How Smart Women Win in the New Economy, was released, I believe, last November. So
right, 3 months ago.
Oh, yes, and it seems like much longer for some reason. It doesn't feel like it was just a couple of months ago that we had a new year begin. So you could start and please share a bit about the book and what prompted you to decide that you wanted to write this.
Yeah, so I have 3 decades as an engineer, as a woman, as a entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. And for all that time, I basically put my head down and did my job and solved my problems and took on challenges and minded my own business. And about 2 years ago, when the talk about women in Silicon Valley started becoming much more seen in the headlines, I started thinking that I actually had to come forth and talk about myself, just not as a Silicon Valley, entrepreneur and a success, but actually as a female entrepreneur and female success. The reason for that is because I felt that young women, if they were reading the headlines, and many were getting discouraged, and some of them were opting out from being a, contributing member to Silicon Valley, to technology companies. And that really broke my heart, because the one thing that is for sure is that we need more women, not less women in technology. So I felt that I had to do my part. I had to tell my story, and 27 other women I interviewed for Power Up, and tell their stories and package our learnings, bottle it up, and share in a very pragmatic way. This worked for us. This didn't work for us. This is how we got here. This is how we dealt with defeat and failure. This is how we got the funding for our companies, or this is how we got the promotions. So it is very pragmatic, very kind of actionable advice from 28 different lives, all of them women in Silicon Valley in technology companies. So really the book was written to be role models. I felt the incredible responsibility to the next generation, and also to be inspiring so that people don't opt out, but they continue and push forward.
And that's very powerful, actually. I think that's going to help a lot of people, particularly, women who want to go into this field and work with startups who, may be discouraged because they're hearing other things that seem like it's not a welcoming place for them. So I think this is really, very good to put out to show that there are other voices and experiences as well. But, when you arrived in 1976 and read a little bit of your book and just not really, when you arrived and you have to kind of get acclimated to this new place and what you're going to be doing here, and then you arrived, it said in Chicago, but then you ended up going to California.
Yes. Where the weather was more suitable to my clothes.
I can imagine. There's very harsh weather in Chicago from what I understand. So I can imagine California would have been an entirely different place. So, at that time in the 70s, now there's a lot of dialogue regarding women speaking out. But at that time in 76, how was it then when you were entering that world at that time?
So I went to an all-girls high school. And I ended up studying engineering, which might as well have been a all-boys college. Frankly, the transition wasn't that monumental. Looking maybe back, you would say, wow, that was a big change. But it wasn't for me, because I was so very focused on just doing my work. I was focused on taking the best classes, getting the best grades, learning the most, and, preparing myself for a career. And the fact that I was female, in many ways, I felt worked to my advantage, not disadvantage, because I didn't have to work as hard to be noticed. I did get noticed. I got help from my friends. We did problem sets, and oftentimes the groups were willing and very welcoming to include me. So I didn't see as a woman being an engineer to be a hindrance. It was kind of lonely, It would have been much nicer if there were more women that could be friends. But I, at the same time, felt like being with a bunch of guys. They were friendly as well. So I never felt personally that it was going to be hard for me, partly because I was already an immigrant. So things weren't already easy. And that was the least of my problems.
So at that time, how many women really were thinking of Silicon Valley, how many were really a part of that whole environment at that time?
Very few,
Mm-hmm.
about 1%, maybe 1 or 2%.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in my first job as an engineer, as a semiconductor design engineer, I was the only design engineer in my group. There were a few others in the company, but they were just sprinkles, just here and there. So compared to today, where in fact there are many more, especially in the software companies, many more female engineers. The numbers aren't huge, 5%, 10%, but it's better than 1 or 2%.
So there definitely is some improvement over.
From my point of view, yes.
Yes. Definitely. I think that a lot of people look at things and they often don't look at the incremental changes. So they kind of expect things to change overnight.
Right. And they say, why isn't that 50%?
Yes.
Female population is 50%. So why is it not represented equally?
Mm-hmm.
And my attitude is, but we have improved. In fact, we have more Fortune 1000 CEOs who are women today than they did 10 years ago. So things are moving forward, not at the speed we all would like, but I'd rather look at the bright side.
So how did you become involved with Salesforce?
So Mark Benioff, who is the founder CEO of Salesforce, and I worked together when I was at CyberCash. I did 3 startups in the 90s. CyberCash was my second one. CyberCash was a electronic payments infrastructure company, enabling merchants to accept payments online. I'm talking about an era where Amazon was under $5 million in revenue and just a bookseller. So, even though it seems like eons ago, in fact, I'm talking about 1994, 1995, 1996 timeframe. And at that time, Oracle was a partner of CyberCash, and Mark Benioff was my advocate at Oracle for my integration partner. That's how I got to know him.
So what does it feel like now to look at the success of that? Is that something that you would have dreamed of in the beginning?
No, not at all. In all honesty, if someone said this would be a $80+ billion corporation with, revenues in the billions, I would have said, get out of here. I do think that the company, obviously, phenomenal team, phenomenal management, and great leader. So they've done very well, but it hasn't been easy. It wasn't a straight road. In fact, it had many bumps, many ups and downs. And I was on the board for almost 6 years, and we had many close calls. So in hindsight, it seems like such a no-brainer. It certainly wasn't while you were in it.
Yeah, I was asking because a lot of times when people are starting out and you have hopes and dreams and you're not quite sure where you're going to go and you're still figuring it all out, and then you may get to a point in your life where you look back and realize how all these things led you to where you are now.
Correct. And right, but you put, at least in my life, I've always put one foot in front of the other. I never had a grand strategy. I was never that smart. I never had I could never see, 20 steps ahead. I kind of saw 2 or 3 steps ahead. So I just was much more tactical. I took those steps, and the key for me was do the best you can every step of the way.
That's great advice, I think, because I think particularly for young women who may be going out into the world, into these places, and they may wonder, where am I heading? How can I get here? But what you're saying is to kind of take it a step at a time makes more sense and is less overpowering, less intimidating for someone starting out.
Exactly. And, you're not always going to get to where you want to go. You might go somewhere else. The roads might open and you might end up somewhere that is much more tangential to original, path you wanted to pursue. But the key is to pursue. The key is to work really hard. The key is to be very diligent. The key is not to give up. And that's the part about, the current environment that worries me is that people will give up, and nothing can be worse than that because you have to stay in the game.
One of your points, as I mentioned, about owning career choices and while managing risk. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on how someone can do that within that industry?
Yeah, very simply, basically one of the very simple advice that is in the book is if you want to be a director of marketing or you want to be a manager in engineering, start doing the job today before it's given to you. Start showing your company, your management, your board of directors that you have the capability. And you're not going to be paid for that, but you're showing the world that you have the capacity to take that job on. And then ask for it. Ask for it multiple times. You might not get it, but at least the management knows that it's something that you're very interested in. So I do think that it's important to, number one, kind of act as if you have the title already. Sometimes you'll be stepping on feet, but to prove that you're capable. And then secondarily, to vocalize your request. And don't be disappointed if you don't get the job. Keep pushing forward.
That's really
I think
good
resilience
advice.
is really important. Yeah. Too many people, I think, give up early. They're not resilient. They got heartbroken. I mean, one of the things I say is take the word hurt out of your professional vocabulary. At work, there is no place to feel hurt. And, it doesn't matter if you don't get what you want. You'll get something else. Keep going forward. Keep keeping your head high. And getting a job or getting a promotion is just like that, or getting a raise is just like that. You, first of all, have to earn it. And secondarily, you need to ask for it. And third, if you don't get it the first time around, you have to keep at it.
Do you feel that women have a problem asking?
I think so. I think we are oftentimes brought up to be much more polite. So we're afraid that we might be too aggressive, or we might be asking for something that we don't deserve. We're also, unfortunately, more often plagued with perfectionism, where we feel like we have to be perfect to be able to ask for something. And that couldn't be farther from the truth.
That stops you from moving forward, always trying to make things perfect, and they can't be.
I think we talk ourselves, as females, we talk ourselves out of things, and I think I see men talking themselves into things much more than talking themselves out of things.
That's true. I think they will speak up even if they're not particularly confident or versed in what they're talking about. They're going to...
Absolutely.
They're not going to stop and go over it in their minds all day long until they finally do it. They're just going to say it. And a lot of that is our conditioning in society in terms of how we're brought up and expectations. There's a lot of layers to it. But, that also leads to, you're saying, getting credit for your work. That's also something that can be kind of challenging in these environments.
Oh, that's so important. That's so important. And I think that, unfortunately, it even happens in very, kind of minute ways where, let's say you're sitting in a meeting and you say something that everyone thinks, everyone might think it's brilliant, but they don't. They move forward, and then 5 minutes later, someone else says exactly what you said, and people stop and start saying, wow, that's a great idea, or wow, thank you, John. Thank you for saying that. And at those moments, oftentimes, women will sit back and say, wait a second, what happened? Didn't I just say that? How come they didn't hear me and they heard him? But instead of feeling hurt and feeling disappointed, I think the right thing to do is to say, thank you, John, for reinforcing what I just said 5 minutes ago, because it didn't seem to really be heard, but thank you. You put it back on the table, and now it's a lot more, appreciated. So take credit for it.
That's an interesting way to do it.
In a very positive way.
Yes.
Right? In a very positive way. You're not telling John, hey, you're a jerk. You just copied what I said. You're basically saying, you're my ally. You just reinforced what I said.
That's a good way to do it, actually, because I think if you're in that environment at first, you hear that, the first thing is like you just kind of annoyed.
Right. And it's so important to handle our own emotions, right? Feeling hurt, feeling annoyed, feeling irritated, feeling angry. Those are not emotions that help us. They actually hinder us.
Because when you get into that mindset, a lot of times you shut everything else down.
Right.
Right.
And then you quit, which is the worst thing, right? Yes. You walk out.
Yes.
In anger.
Yes. Or you even fantasize about dramatic ways that you're going to leave.
Yes, exactly. You go home and you want to show everyone, and then you feel better.
Yes. That's so true. It's like so much time is spent fantasizing things like that, and what you said is such a I'll say easier way, though it isn't easy because you got to get to that point where you can say that. But it seems like, wow, okay, that's perfect.
Right. Well, practice makes it perfect. So you just have to practice it a lot.
Yeah, I think so. So that you are, spending a lot less time steaming as you're sitting there and really turning it around. That makes a lot more sense. And, speaking of that, you also mentioned about managing sexual dynamics. What are some recommendations for that?
Well, so the most important thing I think is if someone is making innuendos and you don't like it, don't engage. And don't engage at all. Just look at them blankly, and usually they get the message. If they don't get the message, they continue, then you call it out. You say, I don't appreciate that. That doesn't belong in the workplace. You just call it out right then and there. Don't let it simmer. Don't let it sit. The other thing on the opposite extreme is if you have someone that you're working with, a male colleague that you feel is actually really supportive of you, is really a good mentor or a good ally, I think it's also very important to call that out, to say to that mentor, especially in this negative environment, listen, I really appreciate the amount of time and energy you put into me. I am completely clear about the nature of our relationship. There's no miscommunication or misunderstanding here. You are here to support me in my career, and I really, really value that, so please keep doing it. So that is also really important because I think a lot of guys are worried about being misunderstood in this environment.
From what I've been reading, they're not really sure what to think a lot of this going on right now. And some are just very unsure as to how they'll be misunderstood.
Absolutely, and that's very scary. That's very worrisome. I read that about 50% of men interviewed would not go out to dinner with a female colleague one-on-one. I think that's very, very scary because, in fact, we do want our male colleagues to feel comfortable going out to dinner with us because that's where networking is usually taking place. We opt out of those, or they opt out of those. We're at a disadvantage.
Well, what do you think that some companies can do about this to manage this environment and to really encourage people to kind of work through this and not to run away from each other?
I do think that the best is open dialogue. I do think that HR departments can have all hand meetings and say, we actually don't encourage people to stop cross-gender networking. We actually encourage it, but do communicate clearly about the intent so that there's no misunderstanding.
There's been so many things that people might say or do, and I know, when I was in the workplace, certain things, ways that people may behave, at that time, maybe you just let it go by unless it was very overt. But then you look back on it and go, maybe that wasn't quite so good.
Yeah. And the other thing I say is, and I truly believe this, is call out by name the predators. Because if we don't do that, the predative behavior will continue. And the best way to actually bring this to a head is to call out by name the misbehavior in both, gender, across gender issues, as well as with child abuse. This is an issue that's been around for thousands of years. It's not the first time. We're not the first generation. And unfortunately, humans are very often predators. And we need to really accept that and call it out. Things have happened and, for quite some time. So there's got to be ways, to manage this a lot better, I think, going forward. So, what's really great and encouraging is that, in fact, society now is ready to punish bad behavior, ready to punish. It's the first time really in a very, very long time where these guys who were superstars 2 years ago are losing their jobs and being shamed. Yes, you're so right, and it's almost kind of shocking because I'm surprised that that's even right, because that would certainly have been the opposite. Absolutely, yes, yeah, it would have been the opposite not too long ago. So it's very interesting. I think very encouraging, very, very encouraging. Yeah, I think so. But we have to keep at it. Yeah. I think so. I think that's a great point because I think for some people, like we're talking about with your, experiences and how, some of it is being slanted as, oh, this is all negative and, maybe scaring off young women who may want to go into this field. But I think it's also with this topic, a lot of people are kind of looking at it almost in the negative, not seeing that this is something that's kind of clearing out a lot of stuff needs to be cleared. But they're kind of looking at it from a negative perspective. It's like, well, this is too much or too many people are getting caught up in it. So somehow the people who've been doing the predator behavior are the victims, and there's still a lot of that churn going on right now too. I think. Absolutely. But I do think it's a positive time. I mean, I do believe that tomorrow will be better than today. Yeah. It's just that you have to go through certain things to get there. It's not something that appears. You have to kind of get through, certain experiences to clear things up. But we will to be cleared. Yeah. Yeah. And the most important, I think, is to support those. And it's not just females who get the horrible behavior. Men do too, by the way, because many have approached me after my book came out and telling me how much power up applies to them too. So it is, and it is race oriented sometimes, and sometimes it's religiously based, but that feeling of pushing people out or really, mistreating someone for whatever reason that they're other, the otherness. We all have some bit of otherness in us, and we just need to accept and support each other in that. Exactly. And that is very true. And regarding men, I've definitely witnessed that a couple of times in the workplace, and then a lot of times it wasn't given as much importance. Yes, very true. Yeah, which was kind of interesting how it was being disregarded somehow, but it was there. So hopefully a lot of these things can be brought to light. But how did you connect with the women who became part of your book? So many of them I knew, but not all of them. And when I started writing this book, I started reaching out to people for recommendations, whose stories would be interesting for readers, whose learnings, who has had a lot of ups and downs in their careers. I didn't want to just have the people who have had charmed careers, because that doesn't apply to most people. Most people are not going to have charmed careers. So it was that kind of reaching out and networking. And, how did they feel about participating? Were they ready to open up? No, about 50%. And actually a lot of the ones I did know turned me down. They said, listen, things have been working just fine for us, and we don't want to rock the boat. We don't actually want to make our gender an issue. We don't want to be part of a book that is gendered.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally respect that because in many ways I was just like that until 2 years ago.
So what prompted you to say, no, it's time?
Well, as I mentioned before, the idea that these young women have been, reading so much negative news stories that if I were 21, 22, 23 years old today, I think I would really be scared to join the technology industry or the new economy, as I call it. So I felt a real obligation as an older sister to share my uplifting story as well as other uplifting stories. And by the way, uplifting story doesn't mean it's all good.
Right.
It's actually, a lot of it is bad. But it's what makes it uplifting is that you make it through the bad times. You get to the other side. And I just felt that there would be so much value in sharing those. And ultimately, if someone can learn something from our experiences, from our collective experiences, that's a gift you can give.
So would you also recommend that the people going into these companies seek out mentors, or are there mentor programs already in place in a lot of these environments?
I'm not a big mentor person. I actually think that a lot of people are misguided to think that the mentor is like a fairy godmother who's going to show up and give you everything, grant every wish you have, and open up doors and get you jobs. And frankly, it's never worked that way in my life. I say that the best mentor is someone who actually has a symbiotic relationship with you, so that when you win, they win as well. And in that world, your boss is an incredibly important mentorship relationship. Don't choose a job based on salary. Don't choose a job based on really any other parameter when you're in your 20s. Choose a job based on the boss. Get yourself someone who really thinks you're phenomenal, who's going to promote you, teach you, invest in you, and then, give you the raises, give you the promotions, give you the next level.
And you're right about the mentor idea, I think.
I mean, I would have loved to have had a mentor who would be like, come right on my, magic carpet and I'll take you places. But it just didn't go that way.
Right, yeah. It does have that kind of allure to it. So. It does. So that's a good point to make, for those listening, who are thinking somehow they've missed out because they didn't have that.
No, and more than 50%, actually, most of the women I interviewed said they didn't have a mentor in their careers.
That's interesting.
And so it wasn't like but they had some very good bosses. They worked really hard for their boss, and the boss rewarded them. And ultimately, that's, I think, the clearest relationship.
That's very true. I think if you can connect with someone like that, you could really learn a lot. And, it is a win-win for both of you because that person wins as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You make them look good.
Right. That's not a bad thing at all. So.
Correct.
But in your book, you say power comes from having the courage to fail.
Yes, and that's actually how I opened the book.
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking at that at the beginning, and I'm like, that's an interesting viewpoint.
Well,
what do you mean by that?
Let me tell you why I say that. Yeah, because if you think that failure is going to destroy you, you'll never take a chance, right? You'll always do the thing that is the most sure, the most guaranteed, which oftentimes means you won't take any risks, and oftentimes means you won't venture far. And frankly, in my mind, you're going to miss out on a lot of opportunities. So if you have the approach of, you know what, if I fail, no big deal, I'll try again. If this doesn't work, I'll try the next one. And if that one doesn't work, I'll try again. So you don't define yourself by your success or failure. You don't define yourself by that. You define yourself by your learnings, by your growth, because failure ultimately is the best way to learn. And in real life, you need to fail many times before you can be successful once.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think that you only want to focus on success, you're not going to be a happy person because life is full of failure.
That's a great message. And it's interestingly one that I don't think we hear enough in this culture.
Well, unfortunately, we have this American dream mentality where you come, you work hard, and then all kinds of good things happen to you. And sometimes it's true, it happens, but sometimes it doesn't. So if we only expect to have good things happen to us, we're going to be so ill-suited to deal with the difficulties. So I think that our approach has to be that I'm strong enough to fail. And if I fail, it hasn't taken away from me. If anything, it's given to me. I'm richer. I'm much more attractive because I went through that experience.
And I think for a lot of people out here, especially, I know in corporate, a lot of times failure seemed you were just so afraid to show if you didn't know something or didn't do something properly. That it'd be held against you forever.
Yeah, well, I think for me, because I had a master's in electrical engineering, I used to feel like I can be as stupid as I can be in a meeting, and if anyone looks down at me or anyone talks down to me, I can say, hey, I got a great degree. I actually have studied a lot. I'm not stupid, I might not know this, but you can't treat me as if I'm stupid. So that gave me great self-confidence. And it doesn't matter. You don't have to be an engineer to have self-confidence. Whatever it is, whatever makes you feel self-confident, you need to really stand on those pillars. If it's your writing background, or if it is your, debate skills, or whatever it is that you feel you're really good at, you need to really feel confident that you can ask the stupid questions because you have a rock inside.
That's really good. And there's no way to know unless you're willing to ask those questions and
exactly stick your neck out.
Right.
Absolutely.
That's very true. That's very true. So, Magdalena, please share where people can find you and also where they can find your book.
Yes, so the book is available from many book retailers, including online from Amazon, both in electronic form or hard copy or audio. I read the book myself, so you're going to listen to my voice for a while, but I was very, very happy to do that. And also, if you want more information, if you want to see any of the broadcasts or any of my op-eds, other writings, come to Magdalena.com and www.magdalena.com. And there we list not only the retailers, but kind of my current activities around the book.
Oh, that's great. So how was your experience reading your book? Was it exciting, or were you a little nervous, or?
It was very scary. Very scary. Well, I'm completely dyslexic. I am very dyslexic, and I never read what's on the page. When I was a kid and we used to go to church and I had to get up and do readings from the Bible, I used to read things that were completely not in the Bible, and people used to say, she's reading the gospel according to Magdalena. So that's so you can imagine how scary this was to read 250 plus pages. But in fact, once I got into the rhythm of it, I dealt with my fears and I won over my fears. I actually had a great time.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And that's, that's something else that at one time people didn't really know what that was. They didn't have a name for it. They didn't understand it. And,
correct.
Again, yeah.
Yeah. If I had been diagnosed, I would have never been an engineer because everyone would have said, oh, she's dyslexic. She can never be a, engineer.
Wow. That's an interesting,
yeah.
So imagine. Yeah. That's interesting.
So all those parents who worry so much about getting accommodations for their children, I always think that's actually a disservice. I think that kids can figure out sooner or later how to deal with their, shortcomings, with their deficiencies, with their disabilities. And not every disability, of course, kids can figure out. Some do need help, but at least in the school environment, it's important to let children actually deal with their own issues, because as adults, they'll have to.
Right. That's true. And often when you are figuring these things out and working them through, that does give you something that you can use as you go through life.
Absolutely. You learn coping mechanisms.
That's true. And those are always good. It's good to have. Yes. Always very good to have. So, Magdalena, this has been a wonderful conversation, and it's we're almost at the end of that. But I just would like to ask for your final thoughts. What would you like the reader to take away from your book?
So I opened the book and I closed the book with this imagery of water flowing. I'm from Turkey. I'm full-blooded Armenian from Turkey. And when one departs on a big journey, oftentimes the friends, family, and neighbors show up with big buckets of water. And as the person is leaving, they throw the buckets of water after the individual to basically signify an open road, an open journey. Just like water flows, may you be able to reach the destination you're trying to go, or maybe you always be flowing forward. And I think what I would like to leave the listener with is you're not always going to have an open road. You will have boulders, you will have rocks, you will have all kinds of barriers between you and where you want to reach. But just like water, you should always be able to either flow around it or go under it. The key is to move forward. The key isn't always to get exactly where you want, because that's too hard and usually doesn't happen. But the forward momentum is what really matters. And never lose heart. Always know that no matter where you get as your destination, it's going to be a good journey and you're going to have a good time doing it.
Well, that's very, very well said. And I don't think that I could add to that. So,
well, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed this very much.
Well, I'm so glad you'd be here. You're very welcome, because you really shared wonderful information. I think it's really important for people to hear, particularly young women who may be looking at their career choices and business choices, and just to let them know what's out there for them. So thank you so much for joining me, Magdalena. It's just been wonderful.
Thank you for having me.
So everybody, I know you enjoyed this show. Please make sure you share this on social media. As I said, please leave a review. That'd be great. Also, visit Magdalena's website and also check out her writings and her book. And, definitely share that with others who you think would really benefit. And it sounds like a lot of people would. So please make sure that you share it. So once again, some Women Entrepreneurs Radio with your host, Deborah Bailey. So glad you could join me today. We'll see you again next time. Bye. Thanks for joining us. You can also join in the conversation on Facebook.com/Women Entrepreneurs and on the website, WomenEntrepreneurSecrets.com. And don't forget to listen in on dvcoach.podomatic.com and on iTunes.